The Galactic Council's diplomatic hall gleamed with bioluminescent architecture, a testament to 5,000 years of interstellar cooperation. Susan watched from her position near the refreshment alcove as Evan stood perfectly still, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, facing the young Draconid prince who had just made a grave mistake. Prince Zarkoth, barely 19 cycles old and resplendent in ceremonial scales that shimmered between crimson and gold, had his serpentine neck extended to its full, intimidating height. His voice carried across the hall, sharp with youthful arrogance. "Your species has been part of the council for merely 2 centuries, human," the prince hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air dismissively. "My bloodline has ruled the Draconid Empire for 15,000 years. What could you possibly teach me about honor or sacrifice?" Susan felt her jaw tighten. She'd worked with Evan for 3 years at the Terran Diplomatic Corps, and she knew what most aliens didn't. The quiet man with graying temples and kind eyes had stories carved into his soul that would make even the ancient Draconids weep. Evan's expression didn't change. He simply looked at the young prince with those steady brown eyes. The same eyes that had seen things the galaxy preferred to forget. Around them, delegates from dozens of species had fallen silent, their attention drawn to the confrontation. Commander Evans served in the Titan front. Susan wanted to shout at the ignorant prince. He held the line at Proxima Station when your people were too afraid to enter that sector. But she remained silent, because that's what Evan had taught her. Words without weight were just noise. The prince continued, emboldened by Evan's silence. "The Draconid warriors have conquered 17 solar systems. We've fought wars that lasted centuries. And you," he gestured dismissively at Evan's simple diplomatic uniform, "you stand here in your plain cloth, representing a species that only just learned to leave their own planet. Tell me, human, what wars have you fought?" Susan saw it then, the slightest twitch at the corner of Evan's mouth. Not anger. Something sadder. Something that made her heart ache. Evan took a slow breath, and for a moment, Susan thought he might speak. The hall held its breath with her. Even Ambassador Tekresh, the ancient Vortelian who had mediated conflicts for 3 centuries, leaned forward with interest. But Evan simply unbuttoned his left cuff with deliberate care and rolled up his sleeve. The scars told their own story. Plasma burns that had melted and reformed skin into rivers of tissue. The distinctive marks of Kresh neurotoxin exposure that left permanent neural damage patterns visible on the skin. And there, on his forearm, the crystalline scarring that only came from direct exposure to void radiation, the kind that should have killed him. The prince's vertical pupils contracted to slits. Even in his youth and arrogance, he recognized what he was seeing. Susan had heard the stories, though Evan never told them himself. She'd read the classified files when they were partnered. The Titan front, where humanity's Third Fleet held a critical jump point against the Kresh swarm for 63 days. Where 10,000 humans faced 3 million Kresh. Where the survival rate was 4%. Evan had been there for all 63 days. He'd been a lieutenant then, just 26 years old, commanding a destroyer that had been torn to pieces around him. He'd led the survivors in hand-to-hand combat in depressurized corridors, fighting with broken ribs and a suit that was more patches than original material. He'd dragged wounded soldiers through bulkheads as the ship died around them. He'd made it to the escape pods with 16 survivors out of a crew of 400. And then he'd gone back. Twice. The prince's voice had lost its sharp edge. Those scars. Evan rolled his sleeve back down, his movements unhurried and precise. He buttoned the cuff carefully, his face still peaceful, still composed. Then he looked at Prince Zarkoth one last time, not with anger or contempt, but with something that made the young Draconid take an involuntary step back. Pity. Without a word, Evan turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps were quiet on the crystalline floor, measured and calm. He didn't rush. He didn't storm out. He simply left, as if the prince's words had been nothing more than the wind. Susan moved to follow, but Ambassador Tekresh's tentacle touched her shoulder gently. The ancient Vortelian's eyes, all 7 of them, were fixed on the departing human with an expression of profound respect. "Let him go, young Susan," Tekresh said softly, though his voice carried throughout the now silent hall. "Your Commander Evans just delivered the most devastating response possible." The prince stood frozen, his earlier bravado crumbling. Around the hall, elder delegates, beings who had lived through wars and peace, triumph and tragedy, nodded slowly. They understood what the young prince was only beginning to grasp. Evan hadn't needed to speak. He hadn't needed to recite his service record or list his decorations or explain that he'd been awarded humanity's highest honors 3 times over. He hadn't needed to mention that the Kresh swarm, which had terrified half the galaxy, had never taken another human position after the Titan front. He'd simply shown a glimpse of what he carried every day and chosen not to educate someone who wasn't ready to learn. Susan caught one last sight of Evan as he exited the hall, his shoulders straight, his head high, walking with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove. The young prince sank slowly into a formal bow, though Evan was no longer there to see it. And in that moment, Prince Zarkoth aged far more than his 19 cycles. Human dignity, Susan realized, wasn't about words or displays or demands for respect. Sometimes it was just about knowing when to walk away,